You want to go back 50 years? Let me show you what that looks like. It looks like shame. It looks like forced silence. It looks like hospitals and electroshock therapy. It looks like conversion camps. It looks like kids jumping out of windows. It looks like parents locking their children inside for fear of what the neighbors might say. It looks like a society so afraid of gender variance that it would rather destroy its children than learn to understand them. And you want to go back there proudly, as if you've discovered something new, as if your regression is courage, as if cruelty is virtue. You want a society where everyone fits in because everyone is terrified not to. And you call that morality. But let me tell you something. Your executive orders will never make trans people go away. Your speeches will never unmake the truth. Your bans, your censorship, your criminalization of care, none of it will stop a child from knowing who they are. It will only stop them from feeling safe saying it out loud. You think you can legislate identity out of existence. You think you can redraw the boundaries of humanity with legalese and press releases. But the only thing you're really doing is creating a new generation of trauma survivors. You know exactly what you're doing. You know there are children out there watching the news, seeing politicians point fingers and call people like them dangerous, deluded, diseased. You know there are parents now afraid to ask questions, afraid to take their child to a doctor, afraid to say, "I love you" in public. You know there are teachers who used to provide safety who now hide behind fear, who've been told that acknowledging a child's name or pronoun is a political act. You know the chilling effect. You designed it. You brag about it. And you dare call it protection. There are adults who can fight back. There are people who have found their voice, who have the words, who have the legal support, who can resist your hatred. But children cannot. And that is why you're cowards. Because you don't target the strong. You don't attack the powerful. You don't legislate against CEOs or executives or billionaires who never fit your mold. You go after 10-year-olds. You go after teachers. You go after librarians. You go after parents who say, "My child is perfect." You go after families who love each other in ways you don't understand. You criminalize empathy. And now, we have a country where cisgender heterosexual parents feel comfortable because everything they believe is reflected back at them in the law. They're told their children are normal, safe, healthy, blessed. But the parents of non-binary or transgender children live in fear. They lie to neighbors. They lie to teachers. They hide who their child is. They skip doctor visits. They delete social media accounts. They sit in silence, hoping their child can just make it through another year without falling apart. They are no longer allowed to hope. That is what you've stolen from them. And some of them are still trying to listen to you. Still clinging to the church. Still believing that faith means rejecting their own child's identity. Still hoping that maybe the pastor is right, that maybe their child is just confused, that maybe this will go away. But it won't. And by the time they realize that, their child will have learned not to trust them. Their child will have learned to fake a smile. Their child will have learned to perform. And that is the most violent outcome of all. A child who no longer believes they are worthy of love unless they pretend to be someone else. You did not invent this hatred, but you polished it. You repackaged it. You brought it back with new branding, new slogans, new targets. You turned ignorance into a policy platform. You monetized fear. You weaponized children against children. You manufactured a war that didn't exist. And now you're surprised that some of us are fighting back. You're shocked that we're angry, that we're not being polite, that we're calling this what it is, a campaign of psychological warfare against the most vulnerable people in society. But make no mistake, this will not end quietly. You will not erase an entire generation of transgender and non-binary children without resistance. You will not silence every teacher. You will not convert every parent. You will not succeed in turning every home into a place of fear. Because for every piece of legislation you pass, there will be someone ready to expose what it really does. For every lie you tell, there will be a child who survives long enough to tell the truth. For every bully emboldened by your words, there will be someone who says, "Not this time." You claim to defend freedom, but what you're doing is the opposite. You are narrowing life. You are shrinking possibility. You are turning gender into a prison. You are demanding obedience, conformity, silence. You are telling children that being free means being invisible. That being loved means being someone else. That being safe means never telling the truth. That's not freedom. That's coercion. The reality is simple. Children are not confused. You are. Children are not dangerous. You are. Children are not broken. You are. Children are not ideological. You are. What you fear is not confusion. It's clarity. You fear the clarity of a child who knows who they are. You fear the power of a child who demands to be seen. You fear the parents who say, "My child deserves to live freely." You fear the teachers who won't back down. You fear the science you don't understand. You fear the truth. And so you lie. You tell people that gender identity is a delusion. You tell people that clothing is sexual. You tell people that affirming care is mutilation. You tell people that respecting names is indoctrination. You tell people that doctors are criminals, that parents are abusers, that teachers are radicals, that children are threats, that compassion is extremism. You twist the language until the only thing left is fear. And you sell that fear like a product. But the lie is collapsing. The harm is visible. And the resistance is growing. You cannot keep this up forever. You cannot legislate reality out of existence. You cannot permanently suppress every act of love. You cannot hold back an entire generation. You can delay them. You can hurt them. You can traumatize them. But you cannot unmake them. They exist. They are here. They are not going back. And now that they are here, you are left with one tactic: erasure by exhaustion. You push and push, hoping that families will get tired, that children will give up, that advocates will stop speaking, that medical professionals will abandon their ethics. You rely on fatigue. You think that if you make life hard enough, loud enough, terrifying enough, people will just stop fighting. You think that by banning books, firing teachers, intimidating clinics, defunding support groups, and turning your cruelty into law, people will surrender. But you're wrong. Because those who have nothing left to lose will not surrender. They will outlast you. You underestimate the strength that comes from surviving your policies. You underestimate the clarity that comes when a child is forced to defend their own existence. You underestimate the power of a parent who realizes too late the damage your ideas have caused and vows never to listen to you again. You underestimate the teacher who finally decides that following their conscience is worth the risk. You underestimate every small act of defiance, the note passed in class that says, "I see you," the teacher who uses the right name behind closed doors, the friend who walks someone home so they don't get followed. Your laws can't stop those moments. You think you're building a nation of order and discipline, but what you're really building is a machine of repression. A surveillance state where a child's haircut or hoodie becomes cause for concern, where a diary can be used as evidence against a family, where self-expression is read as criminal intent. You are criminalizing existence. And the people watching you do it, the international community, human rights organizations, medical institutions, historians, they know exactly what this is. This is the authoritarian impulse dressed up in moral panic. This is state-sponsored gaslighting. And still, you press on. You cut funding to inclusive education. You put pressure on school boards. You flood the media with misinformation. You train entire segments of the population to see gender variance as dangerous, pathological, anti-family, anti-religion. You encourage parents to fear their own children. You build legal frameworks that punish affirmation and reward rejection. And you do it all under the banner of safety. But the only people who feel safer now are the bullies, the parents who hit, the teachers who mock, the classmates who record a beating and post it online. You have handed power to the cruelest among us. And what of the children who disappear into silence, who turn their backs on their own names, who learn to mimic what you approve of, who bury their feelings so deeply they no longer know who they are? You think you've succeeded with them. You see them as proof that your system works. But they are not proof of success. They are evidence of harm. You are not helping them. You are hollowing them out. You are manufacturing dissociation, learned compliance, and lifelong mistrust. And when these children become teenagers, what then? You've set them up to believe that honesty is dangerous, that intimacy is unsafe, that their identities are shameful. They won't bring their partners home. They won't speak openly. They'll retreat. They'll seek connection in the dark, in secrecy, without support. They'll learn to compartmentalize love, to reduce relationships to survival, not growth. You've taken away their ability to hope out loud. Some of you call this discipline. Some of you say it's about values. But it's not. It's about punishment. You are punishing children for disrupting the image of the family that lives in your imagination. You are punishing them for not fitting the roles you've decided they must play. You are punishing them for being born in a time when we finally began to understand gender. And your punishment will echo for decades, long after your name is forgotten. Because these children will carry it in their bodies, in their memories, in their relationships, in their inability to trust the people who are supposed to protect them. You can't bring back the past. You can't freeze time. You can't undo decades of research and lived experience. You can lie about it. You can misrepresent it. You can criminalize it. But the truth is still there. In every medical journal you ignore. In every country that affirms gender diversity. In every court ruling that protects trans rights. In every therapist who refuses to be silenced. In every parent who learns how to love their child on their child's terms. In every child who survives your policies and grows up to say, "I'm still here." And when you are finally held accountable, when the documents are unsealed, when the hearings begin, when the children you targeted are adults standing behind microphones, naming what you did to them, the record will be clear. You didn't just oppose policy. You inflicted harm. You didn't just question science. You manipulated it. You didn't just make mistakes. You committed acts of deliberate, institutional violence. And there will be no mercy in the telling of that history. There will be no redemption through revision. You don't get to soften the language later. You don't get to reframe it as misunderstanding or confusion or good intentions gone wrong. You said what you said. You signed what you signed. You weaponized the full force of the state to suppress a truth that children already knew before you opened your mouth. And you did it knowing the psychological cost because it was never about evidence, it was about control. You don't fear a crisis. You need a crisis. You build your platform on the idea that someone else's dignity is dangerous. You measure power by obedience. You think if people are silent, they agree. But silence is not consent. It's compression. And you've squeezed so hard that even the quietest children are finding ways to speak. A look, a pause, a refusal, a name whispered in a hallway. The fight doesn't begin when the law fails. It begins in the moment someone realizes the law has no authority over who they are. And it's happening all around you. You pretend to care about medical risk, yet you've built policy around anecdotes and paranoia. You reject peer-reviewed science in favor of hearsay. You elevate detransition narratives not because you care about those individuals, but because they're useful to you, tools for discrediting everyone else. You don't advocate for better care. You block access entirely. You don't want truth. You want permission to punish. You manufacture urgency where there is none, while ignoring the real urgency. Kids trying to stay alive in the hostile world you're engineering. You target words, pronouns, labels, names, as if destroying language will destroy the people who use it. You legislate definitions. You redefine identity by decree. You replace scientific consensus with legal fiction. You think if the dictionary bends to your will, the world will follow. But you can't strip a word of its power just by outlawing it. You can't make a person disappear by banning their description. You can't cut out a truth because it's inconvenient to your ideology. Reality has never been subject to your approval. And the people watching? They see the pattern. The same one that's always played out when those in power feel threatened by those they can't control. Erase, isolate, criminalize, pretend to protect. Offer purity. Sell fear. Demand compliance. And punish the ones who refuse to disappear. This is not new. This is historical repetition. But this time, your target is a generation you underestimated. These are not passive children. These are not silent families. These are not frightened teachers. These are people who have been pushed to a point where politeness becomes complicity. And they're done playing your game. What you've underestimated, more than anything, is the reach of those you've tried to erase. Trans and non-binary people are everywhere. In every town, every school, every field, every profession. You cannot purge them without tearing down the entire structure of your society. You cannot isolate them without fracturing every community. You cannot legislate them out of existence without writing your own institutions into irrelevance. You are making yourselves obsolete, not by accident, but by your refusal to evolve. This is not about winning an argument. There is no debate. There is no symmetry between oppression and resistance. There is only one side doing harm and one side refusing to vanish. And those of us who have watched, who have listened, who have read your policies and heard your speeches and seen the results in hospital intake forms and school absences and silent bedrooms, we know exactly who you are. And we are documenting every move. Your legacy is being written, not by your followers, but by those you've tried to erase. And when it is read back to you, word for word, policy for policy, consequence for consequence, you will not be remembered as defenders of children. You will be remembered as architects of fear, as cowards who hid behind fake morality, as aggressors who used the full machinery of the state to target the smallest voices. You will be remembered for the pain you inflicted and for the silence you mistook for victory. You may finish your term. You may pass your laws. You may hold your rallies and feed your audience the same old lies dressed in new uniforms. But you cannot escape what's coming. The truth doesn't need permission. It doesn't wait for power to fall. It exists in every child who chooses to live as themselves anyway. In every parent who refuses to obey. In every teacher who takes the risk. In every doctor who says no more. In every person who survived you and came out stronger. And we are counting every one of them.